AOC plays the race card on Nancy Pelosi. And there are some Democrats, African American Democrats, that are not having it. And I got to be honest, I read the quote and I thought to myself, whoa, that goes too far because that's way out of bounds. The issue that you're arguing about has nothing to do with race, it has everything to do with class. And yet, race was the thing that AOC highlighted. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. And yes, AOC, in an article in the Washington Post that is a response to a few events that I'll talk about in this video, AOC brings up this notion that Nancy Pelosi was singling out women of color, as if women of color, or if color has anything to do with this topic at all. It's just odd that you would add women of color into something that had nothing to do with issues of color. And that seems to be the thing that some people are taking issue with. Look, this has been precipitating for a while. I've said before that there's a war within the context of the Democratic Party, and I've stood by that. And this has taken somewhat of an odd turn, though, because something that was actually an issue of class is now, oddly enough, is becoming, to some degree, contentions on race, which I think have less basis. This came to a head during the humanitarian bill battle. If you remember, it hit the pages pretty heavily that Donald Trump administration had horrendous conditions at the border. You had the lawyers arguing that not having soap or not having toothpaste or toothbrush was some degree still, or that you could still have sanitary conditions and conditions where people don't have soap. This is, of course, nonsense. Now, the complaint was we don't have the money to do these things, in which case Congress was trying to appropriate the money. The House of Representatives, that's controlled by the Democratic Party, there were elements of the Democratic Party that believed some, like AOC, was just against it in its entirety. We shouldn't be throwing money at this particular issue. She's the one that wants to abolish ICE and so forth. She even, I've heard her say she wants to abolish National Homeland Security. NHS, I'm sorry. Let's scratch the part. The first part is true. She wants to abolish ICE. So there's that part. But there are other people who thought the protections on it didn't go far enough. The problem that these guys ran into had more to do with, look, there is clearly a crisis at the border. The Republicans in the Senate appropriated something for it. We got to do something about it. And even though this bill is not perfect, can we really just hold this bill up for something that is clearly a crisis? Republicans don't care about it, so they're not going to move on it. There is no pressure or impetus on them to move at all because this is not something that digs into them. This is something that digs into the Democratic Party. And so AOC and her group, now that they've dubbed themselves the Squad, never dub yourself anything if you're in politics. It comes across as cartoonish. But they've dubbed themselves the Squad, was against it. They got 4 votes. The 4 people who were part of the Squad. Ilhan Omar, Ayanna Pressley, and Rashid Tlaib. Nancy Pelosi made the point that, look, you can have your large Twitter following, and then she added like a whatever, and which kind of seemed to kind of make it more diminutive in regards to their influence. You can have your Twitter following, but our goal is to get stuff done and get politics done. And fact of the matter is, what was shown was that your Twitter following wasn't enough to galvanize you actual support in this sense of getting this legislation through. Now, people took offense to this, especially lefties who thought Nancy Pelosi was belittling them. Even Sam Cedar, one concentration camp less Sam Cedar, even he took issue with this, saying, God, I supported Nancy Pelosi for the leadership challenge, and now she's belittling us. Problem is, Nancy Pelosi, in that very specific instance, clearly she was somewhat right, even though that kind of goes down as a bitter pill. I'm one of those people that don't believe the Democratic Party has changed. And so this doesn't shock me one iota. However, it is shocking to the people that back Pelosi for the leadership challenge that call themselves lefties and are now being kind of hit on the knuckles on this. Nancy Pelosi went further. They had a closed-door meeting. And in that closed-door meeting, Nancy Pelosi, that meeting can be boiled down to don't tweet. If you have an issue, bring it to me. The buck stops with me. And then she gave this impassioned defense of blue dog Democrats, of the moderates, of the established order of things. AOC came out this meeting and said that she thought it was outright disrespectful. Let's see the quote. It had been outright disrespectful and with the explicit singling out of newly elected women of color. Now, if you'd have just said it was outright disrespectful, and if you'd have said they're singling out the newly singling elected members of Congress, there was no issue. You added in women of color, which made it seem as if there was something about any of this that had to do with your race or your gender. What I will put to you is that your race or your gender has nothing to do with Nancy Pelosi hitting you over the knuckles. Her job as Speaker of the House is to keep that House together to some degree. And you guys have different interests. And because you guys have different interests, you're coming into some degree of conflict. You came into Congress with the express interest of getting Medicare for All passed, climate legislation passed, expansion of Social Security, etc., etc. You have the wish list, the Green New Deal, job guarantee, the works. In order for you to do that, you're going to have to get some of those members who are staunchly against everything you represent, who are Democrats, to back you or to get them out of office. That is, by definition, a tension that is unresolvable. Either they back you or they get taken out of office, or you fail in your objectives. This has nothing to do with your race. This has nothing to do with your sex. This has nothing to do with your gender. This has everything to do with political posturing. You are politically postured in a different way than they are. That's the conflict. Nancy Pelosi's job is made more difficult by this conflict. This is not about your race. This is not about your gender. This is everything to do with your political positioning. I need that to be extraordinarily clear. I have a pet peeve about people throwing race into conversations where race has nothing to do with the conversation. And, Republicans always argue about this all the time. Oh, you guys always throwing race into it. When I bring race up, I want it to be a serious case where I can point to and say, look, this is more likely than not either racist or this comes across in somewhat of a way that denigrates or undermines a race. Nothing in that meeting that took place behind those closed doors had to do with your race. You might say it had to do with your class. You could say it had to do with your political posturing. You could say it had to do with your ideology. You can even, in a stretch, say it had to do with your age, which I don't necessarily think it had to do with that. It's your political posturing. Why are you bringing race or gender into something that is purely and entirely political posturing? I want to be clear on that. I am one of those people who like AOC. And so when I say this, I'm not saying this to somebody who dislikes AOC. This is not this kind of Fox News way of trying to hit her for everything. There are things that she does that I think are absolutely wonderful. And I make it very clear when I think that's the case. This is not one of those things. You may dislike Nancy Pelosi's article, meaning the article that took place in the New York Times. You may dislike the fact that Nancy Pelosi took these people behind closed doors and hit them on the knuckles. By the same token, all of this has to do with political posturing. None of it has to do with race or sex. Just want to make that extraordinarily clear. One of the things that took place was, so this is Lacey Clay. Lacey Clay, Census and National Archives Chairman Lacey Clay. Lacey Clay took great issue with bringing race into this because his point was this has nothing to do with race. They just want to score points for whatever reason. That I find juvenile now. Their tactics, said Democrat Lacey Clay. I find that the ignorance to be beyond belief about American history and the whole, and who are really the segregationists. How dare, so the accusations did not play well, right? How dare they try to play the race card at this point? It shows the weakness of their argument, he continued. It's damaging to the party and to the internal workings of the Democratic Party. Now, that part I care less about. If I'm being honest, I care less about that point. If the Democratic Party blows up because of issues of class, where you have one side is trying to change the way things are, meaning trying to get through Medicare for all, trying to get an expansion of Social Security, trying to get through college education where people can get it without having thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars of debt on their backs, then I am for that. And so I am not against AOC's position on we're trying to change things in Washington. And to do that, you got to break some eggs, meaning people are going to dislike us because you guys have had an established order for so long. That needs to change. I'm okay with that. That's a class issue. That's even, you could say, a political issue, an ideology issue. All that's fair game. And if she hit you on race, if she hit you on your gender, then of course I will be standing right there shoulder to shoulder with you trying to go after Pelosi for doing so. But that's not clear what's being said. And you being women of color does not absolve you from being criticized. I hope that's extraordinarily clear for anybody that's an AOC supporter or for AOC herself. Nancy Pelosi might have came across as if she was belittling you, and she might have been doing so. It might have came across as if she was wagging her finger at you. It may have came across as if she was trying to put you down almost into a place of a childish position. It may have even came across as she was singling you out. All of that might have taken place, and all of that, most likely, I could even believe was true. None of that has to do with your race or your sex. It's your ideology. It's your political positioning. It may even be your age. It may even be your class. But understand Pelosi's job is different. And that job is going to bring you in direct conflict. That direct conflict is not because she's looking at you in a particular racial place. On a secondary point, from the perspective of the individuals involved in positions in our society, you're always stuck in a not knowing position. If you're black, if you're gay, or straight, whatever, you're always stuck in a position of not knowing. The history of this particular country has left you in a position where you don't necessarily know if the reason that people do things are because of external factors like race or sex or gender or so forth, or if they're doing those things out of some other intent that goes beyond those things. As somebody who's African American, I understand where AOC is coming from in this. I don't necessarily know if she's just being rank political and is just using sex and race for political expedience on this. I'm uncertain. I would say as somebody who's part of the African American persuasion that oftentimes you're stuck in positions of not knowing. That's not just a race thing. That's anything just by being a person. You don't know. You have no idea what reality is. You have no idea if the reason that a person gives you that they're doing are the real reasons that the person is doing those things. And especially with the history of this particular country, you have to give people a certain degree of leeway in this. It's like, forgive me if I'm going too far in my perspective. It's just born out of the environment to which I came from. That's essentially on both sides, if I'm being honest. Meaning race and sex shouldn't be the first thing you jump to. Even if that may be the way you feel about a situation, that may be an objective reality that go beyond just this notion of race and sex. Even, again, if that's the way you feel. Feeling may be different than the reality of it in and of itself. I give AOC the benefit of the doubt that she's not just playing the race card just out of raw politics. I give her the benefit of the doubt. The people who are... This is Clay, the gentleman that I mentioned earlier that was outraged by them playing the race card. This is the squad. Ilhan Omar, I've defended her on multiple occasions. AOC, I've defended and supported her on multiple occasions. Tlaib, defended and supported. And Presley hasn't really said or done anything that I needed to support, defend, or go after. So she's somewhat of a blank in my book. I guess my point is, under normal circumstances, I'm in defense of all of these people. In those circumstances, she trespasses on going into the loony left. Come back to the light, AOC.